Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. And this time we are sharing titles that are related to families or family relationships because May is National Family Month. Also, just a technicality, National Family Month actually runs from Mother's Day until Father's Day. So, just so you know, these are the important things we learn when we're librarians. As we talk about our family-related titles, if you'd like to get your hands on any of them, there are several ways to go about doing that. The first is to simply contact your local branch of the Monroe County Library System, and any of the staff there will be more than happy to assist you. If you'd like to go online through our online catalog, you can request physical versions, hardcovers, paperbacks, audiobooks on CD, and that website is on the screen now. Some of our titles you'll see are available via one of our two apps so that you could download them as an ebook or an audiobook. And the two platforms that the Monroe County Library System provides are Libby, which has downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and also magazines, and Hoopla, which has downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and also movies, music, and graphic novels. And the great thing about Hoopla is if you see the lightning bolt, there is never a wait for those items. They can be downloaded immediately, as well as the fact that you and 45 of your closest friends can all check out the same item on the Hoopla platform at the same time. I'm Jennifer Groneski, and I am, now you know what I'm going to be talking about later. I am the community librarian for the Dundee area libraries. And our introductory question for this week is to share one of your favorite family moments. And this is really hard, but my child is going to be a high schooler next year, and he's my only. So thinking of him being in high school is like, ah! So looking back at old pictures of him, I was reminded of his preschool graduation. And, the teachers prepare them to make sure that they're behaved because they had to stand on stage. I don't remember if they stood or sat, but they had to be on stage for a little while their teachers said nice things about them. And so they had talked to them. And so we had talked to Tony, make sure you sit still, don't poke your neighbor, don't make faces. And my parents came with us to the ceremony. And my dad is always an instigator. And so Tony's on stage doing what he's supposed to. And my dad starts making faces at him, kind of waving, making faces at him. And Tony looks at his teacher and goes, my grandpa's making faces at me just in the middle of the ceremony. Like, that teacher needs to get after my grandpa because he's not behaving. And we're all supposed to be behaving. So that's a good moment for us. It's those kids being kids moments. I love having both my parents there. So, and now that he's reaching another milestone, it's one of those things you think about. So that's one of my favorite family moments. Also with us this week is Stephanie Winterstein, our youth services coordinator, and you will also see her doing youth programming at the Ellis and Ida branches. And what's a favorite family moment for you, Stephanie?
Gosh, we have a lot. But when I first thought of this question, the first thing came to mind is I got remarried 3 years ago, and that was a really special day for a lot of reasons, but mostly because it kind of completed our family. But it was so sweet because it was just my husband, my kids, my parents, his parents, and his brother and my sister-in-law. And it was just a small, intimate group. It was about as perfect as it could get because it was kind of like the perfect joining of, our two families into one family. And by the end of, we had a destination wedding, so that made it even cooler. So by the end of the week, it was the first time that like my family and his family had spent a lot of time together. So it was like by the end of it, we were all crying and hugging and like, So I don't know, it just kind of like completed everything and made everything, perfect for us. So like, now I've got all that to look forward to for the rest of my life. So that's probably a little too sappy, but
no, that's lovely. Thank you, Stephanie. Also with us this week is Jen McCarty, who is our circulation supervisor at our Ellis branch. And what's a favorite family moment for you, Jen?
The first one that came to mind for me was in the summer of 2021, so last summer, we took our kids to Disney World, and they've been to Disney World before. They're very spoiled in that regard. But this time, you know, coming out of pandemic is still a thing. We decided not to tell them in advance, which we've never done. And I am not a secret keeper at all. But we kept waiting. We're going to wait. And it got to the point where, like, I was barely hiding this. There were suitcases. I was packing. I had lists, and they still, like, had no clue that things were going, you know, that this was happening. And we woke them up super early, and they're like, "What is happening?" We said, "Okay, you got to go get dressed." "Why? What time is it? It's so early." And they come downstairs, and I have their clothes out, which of course was Disney clothes. And right on top of their clothes for the day were magic bands, which, if you've been to Disney, that's sort of like your everything. It's your, you know, it's your park pass, it's your key to the room, whatever. And because they've been there before, my oldest notices right away, and he goes, "We going to Disney?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like now we're leaving. We're going to the airport." And my youngest, who hates sleep like it's his job, gets really mad. "You didn't let me sleep in. You woke me up. You didn't let me sleep." And we're like, "Are you not realizing what's happening here? We're going to Disney World." And it just was like the funniest moment for us, because we kept this secret, and one of the kids is excited and one of them's kind of mad about it. I'm like, "Are you happy we're going to Disney World?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, but like you woke me up." And he still brings that up. "I can't believe you didn't let me sleep."
That is appalling. Why would you do that to your child to give them a trip to Disney World?
Right? Yeah. So I love that moment. It's so my children.
Thank you, Jen. And also with us this week is Jessica Otto. And what is one of your favorite family moments, Jessica?
So my favorite family moment is also a Disney World moment. It was, so just to put this into context, so I grew up, was very fortunate to be able to travel to Disney World quite a bit in my childhood, in my teen years with my parents and my sisters. It was always a very special place for us to go. And so back in 2017, I had the opportunity to take my children to Disney World for the very first time. And it was so special. Both of my little ones have been into Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck since practically the day they were born. And so to be able to share this place with them that was so special to me in my childhood was truly magical. And to see them meet Mickey Mouse for the first time was great, even though my oldest one, who was I think around 3 at the time, was over the moon. The younger one, who was not quite 2, was a little not so sure about what was happening, and may have been frowning and perhaps crying in some of the photos, but I'm sure now she really appreciates that.
Yes.
But yeah, it was an amazing experience to be able to share that with them.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. And now we're going to move into some of our favorite books with families in them. And just so you know, that's a lot of books that have families in them. So this was a good topic. And I am going to have Stephanie kick us off.
All right. So when I first heard about this topic, I was like, "Oh, I've got a book. This is perfect." And I actually just read it a couple weeks ago. We went to our cabin, and I never really get a chance to read. And I had a whole weekend by myself and with my husband, but I just read. And this was a book that I started reading like Saturday afternoon at like 2, and I had it done by like 10 o'clock that night. In fact, I was like, "I can't go to bed yet. I got to see how this ends." But it was so good. And it's kind of funny because it's actually a book that my daughter read, and my 17-year-old daughter, and she gave it to me and she said, "Mom, you have to read this. You're going to love it." So when I did, I then gave it to my 19-year-old daughter to read. And I was like, "Oh, this is great. You're going to love it." It's not a happy book at all, but it was so good. But it ends with Us by Colleen Hoover. Now, family in here is a little, it's not warm and fuzzy in any way, and it's more of a romance, which I tend to kind of lean towards a lot of times. But the backstory of the romance and the relationship is the part that it builds the story, so to speak. But it's about Lily, who meets Ryle while she's living in Boston, and she meets him on the roof of a building, not a building that she lives in, but a building that she's drawn to because she likes the scenery of it all. But anyway, it eventually he seems kind of like he's kind of got a dark side, but he and you don't know what that is at first, but he kind of has a dark side, but she's really drawn to him, and he says, I'm never going to get into a relationship. I refuse to do relationships. Needless to say, they started a relationship. However, she keeps thinking about her first love, who was named Atlas, which I like his name, by the way. I think that's really super cool. But she relives this by reading her old diary entries. But she didn't write Dear Diary. She wrote to Ellen DeGeneres, which I find really funny. So she'd be like, Dear Ellen, and she would write this whole her diary entries at the time back when she was a teenager to Ellen, but she would talk about watching her show and stuff. But what comes out of it is, I don't want to give too much away because there's a lot of things that I could say that will give things away in the story, but it basically goes back to the generational cycle of things and what you see growing up as children, and certain things that you don't understand why they happened the way they did, or why you didn't make different decisions at the time in her own life, by watching things that her mother went through and the way her father treated her. And then through reliving her diary entries to Ellen about Atlas and the things that he went through. He was actually homeless and living in an abandoned house behind her house, and the reasons that he was doing that. And then with Ryle and the reasons that he is so dark and mysterious, and some of the things that happened. But basically, she gets into an abusive relationship with Ryle, and she didn't realize it at the time. Things happen, and he says it's an accident, but then there's other reasons behind it. They end up getting married, actually. She ends up getting pregnant, and then something happens, which I'm not going to say what happens. But then she basically has to stop the cycle. So she's like, it ends right now. It ends. So there's so much more to it. The family dynamics in it are so deep. I'm going to start babbling because I want to say more because there's so much to talk about. But it's really good. It will definitely, there's a lot of things in there that I saw different perspectives on that I was like, oh, yeah, I never would have thought of certain things that way. But I highly recommend it. Probably 16 and up. It's definitely a good read. Now, on the flip side of my book, the other book is way more lighthearted. It is called The Worm Family. Oh, excuse me. The Worm Family Has Its Picture Taken. What could be cuter than worms posing for, family pictures to hang on their wall? But basically, the mother worm wants a picture for her wall. So the daughter, and I have to think of her name off the top of my head, Emma is the daughter worm. She's really excited because they're going to have their picture taken. So she goes to see all her friends and she tells them about this. And so she goes and she tells Ellie the chipmunk. And Ellie the chipmunk says, oh, we had the most beautiful smiles in our family picture. Well, worms can't smile because they don't have mouths. So she gets really sad and depressed. So then she goes on to her friend, Abby the cat. And, Abby's like, oh, well, I look gorgeous in the picture with my big poofy hair. Well, worms don't have poofy hair. So how's she going to look good in her picture? And needless to say, they go on to each of her animal friends. And one of them was the clothes that they were wearing in one of their costumes. She's like, well, worms don't wear clothes. So Emma goes and she gets a chest of clothes for them to put on these costumes for their pictures, complete with big false teeth because you have to have big smiles. And it was just adorable. They go to see the photographer The photographer's like, he's looking for the Worm family and he doesn't see them anywhere because he sees them all wearing, he didn't recognize them in their fancy costumes. But it's very cute. In the end, they end up making they take their bodies to make a shape for the wall instead of having all that fancy things. But I read that to my classes a couple months ago and they were just cracking up over it. It's definitely a family book. So
all ages.
Yeah, no qualms there on that one. But it's very cute. So if you get a chance, pick it up.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. And now I'm going to ask Jessica if she would share her family titles with us.
So when we're talking about books about families, we have to mention the first family of American crime fiction, the Corleones. Mario Puzo introduced us to the Corleone family in his 1969 novel, The Godfather. This novel details the story of a fictional mafia family that is based in New York City and Long Island, headed by Vito Corleone, the Godfather. Now, I look at the Corleone family as sort of being two families. One is sort of the core family that is related by blood in marriage, including Don Vito, his wife Carmela, and their 4 children, Sonny, Fredo, Michael, and Connie, and also their informally adopted son, Tom Hagen. The Corleone family is also a crime family, one of the 5 families of the New York Mafia. It's run as a business empire. It consists of some of the members of the core family, such as Don Corleone, Sonny Corleone, and Tom Hagen as the consigliere, but it also consists of different business associates and soldiers and capo regimes, all loyal to Don Vito. As the head of the most powerful crime family, Don Corleone often receives requests for help or for favors from those in the community, those within his circle of influence, if you will. One such request comes from a man named Virgil Salazzo, who asks the Don for financial support and legal protection involving a new proposed narcotics business in exchange for the Don receiving a percentage of the business profits. The Godfather's response to this request leads others to attempt to remove him from his place of power. It forces the Don's children to retaliate against the men who would do their father harm. And so this sort of escalates into this initial conflict sort of escalates into this just all-out brutal war between the 5 families, in which there will be casualties on all sides, trusts will be betrayed, and young Michael Corleone, who has also always wished to distance himself from his family's criminal empire, will realize that he must accept his fate and carry on the legacy of his father, Don Vito Corleone. So Puzo's brilliant novel of power, greed, and family remained on the New York Times bestseller list for 67 weeks. It sold more than 9 million copies in its first 2 years of publication. It currently appears as number 53 on the Great American Read list of America's 100 most loved books. It was, of course, adapted into a 1972 Academy Award-winning film of the same name, and also portions of the book that didn't quite fit into the first film were used as the basis for the second film. Portions of the book describing Vito Corleone's youth and also about his young adulthood when he was a young man coming into power. All of that was used as the basis for the 1974 sequel, The Godfather Part 2. So this specifically is the 50th anniversary edition, the 50th anniversary being in 2019. This includes a fascinating new introduction by Francis Ford Coppola, who is the director of the Godfather films, in which he reveals the Puzo's influence behind some of the book's greatest quotes, including, "I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse." So now here we are in 2022, and there is still some new Godfather related content being released and actually still in production. There was recently a mini series was just released based on the turning of the book into the film. My understanding is there is also a feature film currently in production along those same lines. So the fact that this book, more than 50 years after its initial release, still continues to influence our popular culture really speaks to the power of this work, and I think cements Puzo as one of the master storytellers of his generation.
And now I feel bad that I have never read the book, or I've never seen the movie either.
Me
And I don't
either.
know why. I've seen bits and pieces, but I've never watched the whole movie, and now I feel like I need to.
I don't think I've ever seen any part of it. Like, I know the references because they're in so many other things.
Yeah.
Sure.
I've never watched it, and I don't like admitting that.
I know, I feel bad.
Well, I would say it's never too late to pick up a copy of The Godfather and give it a read. It's a great book, and I highly recommend it.
And of course, you have to read the book before you watch the movie. So
I know.
Yes, absolutely. And I recommend the movies. We have the movies in the system as individual copies, and I believe we also have them available as part of one of our binge boxes. So if you just want to read the book and then binge watch all those movies, MCLS has got you covered.
Yay.
So, and now for something completely different. So looking at my first title, I think we can all say that the Corleone family has quite a bit of excitement in their lives. The same cannot be said of the family in my second title, Meet the Dullards, a 2015 picture book by Sarah Pennypacker and illustrated by Daniel Salmieri. So the Dullards are perhaps the most boring family in all of literary history. In fact, it should be noted that this book is the extra boring edition. Mr. and Mrs. Dullard do not like excitement of any kind. And, you know, I get the impression that they always felt that their kids felt the same way. And one day they are shocked to discover that their children, Blanda, Borley, and little Dud, seem to want to have fun. They ask to go to school. They get caught trying to play outside. They even get caught reading books, which Mr. and Mrs. Dullard immediately take away and give them each a blank piece of paper to read instead. Mr. and Mrs. Dullard decide that their house must somehow be causing the children's desire for fun. So they decide the only solution is to move their family to a new house where things only get worse. After they move in, the neighbor shows up. She brings them a chunky applesauce cake to welcome them to the neighborhood, which is Mrs. Dullard just finds completely inappropriate, because what is more unpredictable than chunky applesauce? And then the neighbor, she even dares to use an exclamation point in front of the children. So after dismissing the neighbor, or basically slamming the door in her face, the children are sent to watch the blank TV screen of an unplugged TV while Mr. and Mrs. Dullard explore their new home. They walk into a room that is covered in bright yellow floral wallpaper. Mrs. Dullard immediately faints. The family heads to the paint store to find the most boring shade of paint imaginable. Will this new wall color make this the bestest, most boring house ever? Will an afternoon of watching paint dry as a family cure the children of their desire for fun? Answers to these questions and more in Meet the Dullards, a book that will be enjoyed by parents, but appreciated by children, because I'm sure at some point most children think of their parents as the Dullards, beings that exist just to take all the fun stuff out of their life and give them boring things to do like homework and chores. A fun book. I highly recommend this for you and your family.
I loved this from the cover when you sent it to me. I liked the reader review. I couldn't stop yawning.
No, lots of yawns to be found. If you're looking for a yawn, pick up Meet the Dullards.
So needless to say, I will be requesting Meet the Dullards because really I need some Dullardness in my life.
Everyone does.
Thank you, Jessica.
Welcome.
And let's have Jen share her family titles now.
Okay, mine are going to be weird because that's how I roll. So my first one is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornashek. And this is a story of a most unusual family. So the story begins with Gullveig, who is a witch. This book is actually a take on Norse mythology. So it takes some of the Norse myths that we know and kind of expounds on them with this other character who lightly. We don't know a whole lot about her. So Gullveig has been teaching Odin something, and he wants to, she's a seer. She's able to possibly see the future, and he wants to know something that she doesn't want to tell him. So at the point where we first meet her, she has been burned 3 times and killed 3 times, and she keeps coming back. So this final time that they've killed her, she's been burned. They've ripped her heart out, and she is healing herself, and she's deciding, I'm not going back to Asgard. I'm done with the gods. They are not cool. But a young person or a stranger comes up to her with her heart and says, I think you'd like this back. And it turns out it's Loki. And so Loki gives her heart back. She settles into this forest that is very kind of the edge of the world. No one goes to this forest. And for the longest time, Loki's her only visitor. And she's okay with this. She takes the new name, Agrabota, and she just is happy to live in her solidarity with herself. And she's done with all of the shenanigans of the Asgardians. Another person finally comes upon her wood named Skadi, and Skadi helps her start trading things. She's living in a cave. She doesn't have anything. So Agrabota says, I'm a witch. I can make healing potions, and I can make salves for healing, and I can make things that will stave off hunger. And so Skadi says, well, I trade all over the place. Make me some of these things. And so Skadi starts trading her goods and slowly makes her cave more palatable. Loki's still visiting. So eventually, one evening, Loki shows up again, and they kind of share a moment. And she decides that, this is the person who gave her back her heart, and, maybe that kind of means something. So they spend an evening together, and they decide that he's going to marry her. They're going to be married, and they're going to be husband and wife. But of course, he's Loki. If you're at all familiar with Norse mythology, he's Loki, and he's Loki. He's a little shady. So he disappears for a while, and when he comes back, he's like, ugh, those jerk Asgardians, they made me marry someone over there too. Yeah, I got another wife, sorry. So she's kind of okay with this, whatever. It's not ideal, but we're married. I can live with this. And this is kind of where her story comes in. Agrabota is mentioned in the Norse mythology as the mother of 3 of Loki's children, who are foretold in Ragnarok. So Agrabota ends up giving birth to 3 children. Hel, who is half dead. Then she has an unusual pregnancy that produces Fenrir, a wolf. And then her final birth is even more unusual, and she gives birth to a snake. She ends up giving the prophecy that becomes Ragnarok, and Loki, of course, does Loki things, and he betrays his family to the Asgardians, which, if you're at all familiar with the mythology of Ragnarok, part of the prophecy is that the wolf Fenrir will be the person to swallow Odin. That's her child. The Midgard serpent, or the world serpent, will be the person, and this is her third child, will be the one to devour. I think he actually kills Loki. I just read this book and I've already forgotten the myths, but her children are obviously very, very involved in Ragnarok, which is basically the end of the world. So the second half of the story is Angrboda going on a journey to try to figure out if she can possibly stop what's foretold, if she can change what's foretold. She just wants to do what she can to help her family survive. Is there any way that she can help her children? Forget Loki, he's the jerk. But she wants to help her family, the people that she loves and cares about. She wants to see if she can get them through this prophecy. Her friend Skadi becomes very important because she realizes that these two share a deep love and affection for one another. Skadi has been there through the whole thing. She gives birth to a wolf, and Skadi's like, okay, well, that's weird, but cool. We can deal with that. She gives birth to a snake, same thing. Skadi has always been there for her. And so the second half of the book is basically Angrboda going, okay, well, what can I do to prevent Ragnarok? What can I do to help my children through this? Or how is there any way that we can make this not be terrible? Fantastic book. If you're not particularly familiar with Norse mythology, it might be a little bit weird because there's a ton of really fun references. Generally, when Loki shows up, he's got some new story, and a lot of his little things are stories from Norse mythology. So there's a lot of, kind of jokes that happen off screen. But if you're familiar with Norse mythology, you may have heard some of these things. Thor is kind of dumb and mean, and it's fun to hear the references to Thor kind of being an idiot. But it's a really fun book, and my favorite part was actually the second half with Angrboda going, okay, well, what can I do to protect my family? Her children are not normal, but she's a mother, and she's going to do anything she can for those kids. So that's why I loved this book. It's definitely not a normal family, but it's a family nonetheless, and mothers and the siblings, they love each other, and they're going to do whatever they can to try to get through, the end of the world. No big deal. So that's The Witch's Heart. And my second title is Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. And I picked this one because I feel like it's a little bit more of a story of the family that you make for yourself or create for yourself. This book is about Wallace, and Wallace is pretty terrible. He is he's a lawyer. The book opens with him firing somebody, and he's firing somebody basically because they made like one little mistake, and he has no forgiveness whatsoever. You messed up. He actually basically says, like, we are a well-oiled machine, and if you break down the cogs or slow anything down, I have no use for you. Wallace quickly dies. And upon Wallace's death, he finds himself at his funeral that is being attended by like 3 people, and they don't care that he's gone at all. And he's like, oh, was I really that bad? A Reaper shows up, and her name is May, and she's like, hey, I'm here to take you to the next place. And the next place is basically a way station. So she brings him to Charon's Crossing, which is a tea shop. And there is a ferryman there named Hugo. And Hugo's job is to get Wallace to accept, yes, you've died. This is what comes next. And basically in this tea shop, on the very top level, there's a door that when you're ready, you go through it and to whatever it is. In this tea shop, Wallace meets May, lives here as well. And Hugo and Nelson, who is Wallace's grandfather, who we quickly realize has also not passed on. He's died, but he's still here as a ghost. And Apollo, who is Hugo's dog, who has also not passed on. So Wallace settles into this house with two other ghosts, an old man and a dog, and he quickly realizes that he doesn't necessarily like who he was in life. And in death, he becomes a better person. And he becomes part of this family. He learns how to kind of control his ghostliness. And so he helps out at the tea shop, and he loves Hugo, and he loves May, and he loves Nelson and Apollo, the ghost dog. And the story kind of unfolds with Wallace learning that, yes, his life may be over, but he could still be useful, and he's not ready to move on because he's finally found some happiness in death. And it's a little bit of a love story. And of course, you know, how can you have a love story between a ferryman and a ghost? But maybe you can. And there's a couple other little mysteries. There are, if he tries to stray too far from the tea shop, he'll become untethered, which basically means they call him a husk. It's people that haven't crossed over. It's kind of like more what we think of as ghosts, not necessarily knowing who they are. And Wallace wants to do something about these husks. Like, that's what an awful fate. Not only are you gone, but now you're gone from who you were or who you could be. And so this is a story kind of about acceptance and also finding your place. And for Wallace, he really was a horrible person in life, but in death, he finally realizes that life is not all about money and fine things, and the connections that we make with people are just as important as the things that we can buy, maybe more important than the things we can buy. And having fancy suits and cars and a, you know, expensive house doesn't mean anything if you don't have anyone to share it with. So I loved this book because it really talks about sort of the families that we create for ourselves and learning to, you know, be a better person. And like for Wallace, maybe it was too late for him to be a better person. Maybe it wasn't, but just a lovely, lovely story about accepting who you are and being better for the world and being better for yourself. And I thoroughly enjoyed this story.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen. And I will go ahead and share my family stories. And my first one is Lock and Key, The Golden Age. So Lock and Key started its life as a graphic novel series by Joe Hill and illustrated by Gabriel Rodriguez. And if you don't know, I have to say this, although I'm sure Joe Hill is like out there and tired of it, but Joe Hill is Stephen King's son, and has created a very good career for himself as a horror author. And in particular, he just started a graphic novel horror imprint in the publishing world. But getting back to Lock and Key, so you may have heard that it is also a series on Netflix now, which is fine. The Netflix series is fine, but go and read the graphic novels. So Lock and Key centers on the Locke family, and they live in the Key House in Lovecraft, Massachusetts. And in the Key House are all of these keys that the Locke family has somehow created. And in the first series of books, you find out how the keys are created and you find out why they are so dangerous. And these keys can do incredible things. One of them you can just put into a wall, and it's the Anywhere key, and it will take you anywhere in the world that you can visualize. Another one you can put into the back of your head, and it opens up your head, and you can go in and see your own memories and see your own emotions. And in the first series, one of the characters removes their fear, and it just completely removes it and takes it and buries it and gets rid of it, and then tries to live their life without fear. There are keys that allow you to become a ghost. There are keys for a mending cabinet that can mend anything. There's a key for a music box that will allow you to control others. So there are all sorts of keys. Some of them are very dangerous. The first series looks at how these keys are created. It is set in fairly contemporary times. It's probably, I'm not sure how old the original series is. It's probably like 10 years old now. And then Hill and Rodriguez got together and created some stories about the original Locke family, the ones who initially discovered how to make these amazing magical keys and how that started and how it affected their family. And I am not going to do these stories justice. So there's 5 stories that are all interconnected in this Golden Age collection, and they are incredible. The way that he manages to create a story that is compelling and horrifying, and yet also has you deeply invested in this family. And also deals with death in a remarkable way. You know, because you think of horror novels and you're like, oh, people died. Sorry about that. This one is definitely not dealing. They are dealing with the grief and the desire for what you wish could have happened instead. And so that's all the way throughout these stories is, what do you do when someone you love dies? How do you handle that as a family? And if you could fix it, would you? If you had a key that could somehow fix that, would you? So that's all going on. And then in the final story, they did a crossover with Neil Gaiman's Sandman universe. And if you know Sandman in graphic novels, it's like, first of all, it's one of those very first graphic novels that said a graphic novel can be more than a superhero story. Not that superhero stories aren't bad. If that's your thing, I love those too. But that it can deal with really big issues about why we're here and what the universe is about and how do you deal with really hard, complicated things. But you can do it in this graphic novel with these otherworldly characters, and in particular, afterlife characters in Sandman quite often. So the last one combines Locke and Key with Sandman, and it's amazing. So if you are a graphic novel person, pick this one up. They tell you that you don't have to have read Locke and Key or Sandman to appreciate it. Sandman, I think that is true. Locke and Key, I really think you kind of need to start with the original series. This one will make much more sense and have much more emotional resonance if you've read that first series. But I will stop talking about Locke and Key because I could talk about that forever. So my other book is Circus of Wonders by Elizabeth McNeil. And I am very much a person that tends to pick up books either based on a brief review that I have read somewhere, based on another author has recommended them, or based on the cover. And I'm not entirely sure what made me pick this one up. I think it was just the cover, because Circus of Wonders reminds me of the Night Circus, which I love. And so I saw this and I was like, oh, I love books about circuses. And if it's got wonders, it's probably got magic. And this will be amazing. So I picked it up, and I never read cover blurbs. I feel like cover blurbs give me too much information. I'd rather read a review where somebody has thoughtfully thought about, like, here's enough to give you a taste, but not so much that I'm going to ruin the whole story for you. So I didn't read the cover blurb. I just picked it up, started reading it, and it is not a fantasy. There's no magic in it, but I still ended up loving it. And I'm glad that that happened, because sometimes you just accidentally fall into a book that you really enjoy. It is actually historical fiction. It is set in the 1860s in England at Jasper Jupiter's Circus of Wonders. And so Jasper Jupiter is intent on trying to have a circus like P.T. Barnum's. And in particular, during this time in England, freak shows and oddities are really popular. Queen Victoria has actually had like P.T. Barnum come and visit her and bring some of his most famous, unusual acts. And so Jasper Jupiter's goal is to someday be able to go and visit Queen Victoria. But in order to do that, he's got to find the wonders that are going to make that happen. And so the first wonder that we meet in the book is Nell. And Nell is living on the coast of England in a very small town. It is hand to mouth. They are a farming community. Her father is a drunk, and the circus comes to town, and her father sells her to the circus for some alcohol. She doesn't think that's happened. She thinks that she was kidnapped. When she's told the truth, she's devastated. She also has a brother who she feels like must have been in on this. And so we see Nell's character develop as she turns into the star girl, because her body is covered with tiny little birthmarks that Jasper decides he's going to declare to be constellations. And then he also teaches her how to do a high wire act from a hot air balloon. So she's got all of that going on and trying to figure out what has happened to her family and why they didn't want to keep her. Was it just because she was so different? And then also Jasper has a brother, Toby, and Toby is the photographer in the circus, and their relationship is complicated and fraught. The two of them fought in the Crimean War. And I have to say, I knew next to nothing about the Crimean War, but the Crimean War is one of the first wars where there was war tourism, where people would go out onto the Mediterranean in boats and watch the battles from a distance and see what happened. So that's very interesting to me historically, that people are watching wars and battles as entertainment. And then you also have this circus, which is filled with these people who don't fit into traditional life during this time. And Toby and Jasper both fought in the Crimean War. Something happened there. It has made their relationship just complicated and fraught. They have a very difficult, odd relationship, even though they seem to love each other. So you have the brother relationship going on, and then you have Nell trying to find out what has happened to her family and where she fits now, as well as the whole history of the circus. You find out what happens to all of them throughout the rest of their lives. If you like historical fiction, if you like circus set fiction, particularly those early circuses, this is really good. It's a slow burn. Give it some time at the beginning. You got to kind of wait and see what's going on. But like the last half to quarter, I was just flying through because I wanted to know what happened. So that is Circus of Wonders. So thank you to all of you for sharing your family related titles. And thank you to those of you who listened. And next time, we are going to be talking about books that have to do with our summer reading theme, which is Oceans of Possibilities. So we'll be looking forward to that and what titles that we have. And again, thank you for listening. Bye.